Alright, hello class. This is a pre-lab lecture for the invert zoology class, and we are actually going to be learning a little bit about snails as our representative gastropod. So snails are actually in the phylum Mollusca, class Gastropoda, and Gastropoda actually means stomach, foot. So gastro means stomach and poda means foot. So these organisms are known for their fairly large feet and how that has been modified with the basic body plan of mollusks. Some general information about gastropods. There's many different kinds of gastropods, including snails, which is what we're going to be using in our lab, whelks, which are a quite interesting group of animals, and I'll show you some pictures in class, periwinkles, abalone, and slugs. And out of all of the groups of mollusks or classes, gastropods are by far the largest and most diverse group out of all of them. There's some that have a shell, which is what we'll see in our lab tomorrow. But there's also some gastropods with no shells, like slugs, for example. We find gastropods in saltwater, freshwater, and terrestrially. We also find them on land. And as far as their trophic level or feeding level, they kind of occupy a variety of different trophic levels. Some of them are strictly herbivores. Some are omnivores. Remember, herbivore means that they eat plants. Omnivore means that they eat both plant and animal. There's also some carnivores and scavengers. In some groups, there's also some parasites. So they have been able to exploit many different niches regarding energy and how they obtain energy. Now, if we look at all mollusks, we'll find that all mollusks have a modification of three things. All of them have a mantle, all of them have a foot, and almost all have a shell, or the remnant of a shell. And in the snail, they actually have all three. They've got the mantle right here. And the mantle is kind of like a thin layer of tissue that is adjacent to their shell. And the mantle is what secretes the shell, the calcium, so that they can grow and also repair. They also have a fairly large muscular foot, as you can see right here. And then, of course, they have the shell. So these three basic things we find in a variety of designs and abundance in different classes of mollusks. Now, with the snail that we're going to be working with, we are pretty much going to be working with apple snails, and they exhibit all of these. So as you can see, they have a head, they have a mouth, and they have an anus. So they have a complete digestive system. And as I pointed out, and you should make note in your notes, they have all three of these things present. And as we work through this lab, I want you to think about the other groups of mollusks and how they are designed. So we will be working with clams and oysters, and we also will be working with squid, which is our representative cephalopod. And what I want you to think about and apply is how all of these things are present, but maybe not so developed, or maybe they are more developed in one group over another group. So that's a common thread that they all have, that all mollusks have. Now, as far as snail movement, in our lab, we're going to be looking for how they move about. And there's a couple of things that happen that make it very easy for them to move about. The first thing I want to show you is this snail, and this is actually just a video footage of it gliding along on glass. You might see something like this in the lab. You can see the undulating muscle movement. At this point, you can't really see its mouth, and I will be showing you a snail mouth later. But one thing I want you to make note of is the fact that they do secrete a mucus, and this mucus provides a nice surface upon which they can glide along on any kind of surface. They've made note that snails that have actually been able to move about on razors, and it's because of their mucus secretions that they are able to do that. So that, again, they have undulating muscles in their foot, muscular foot, and that coupled with the mucus allows them to glide along and move about and do their daily thing. Another thing that they are noted for is a structure called the radula. And the radula is this mouth part, and it's kind of like a rotating conveyor belt of tiny teeth. And you can see them when they feed, especially on algae that's maybe growing on glass. You can see it working. So I do have a little video clip to show you here of a snail radula. This is something that you'll see in the lab. So I'm just going to pause it, and this here is the muscular foot, and then this round part with this hole in the middle is the mouth. So you can see it come out and go in, come out and go in, come out and go in. And so that radula is actually a fairly long strand of teeth, and they are all lined up on a structure called the odontophore, and they just rotate that as they feed. So this is a feeding adaptation that they have. They use it for feeding. The structure that these teeth are on is called the odontophore, and this actually has small teeth on it in rows, and it just goes forward and back and forward and back times, many times. And as they go forward and back, they scrape away at whatever they're feeding on. Okay? So in our lab, you're going to see this tomorrow. We are going to be looking at how the mollusk body plan is designed in Gastropod. So our learning target here, you should be able to explain the variations on this body plan where they have a foot, a visceral mass, and a mantle. Remember, visceral mass is a fancy word for their guts. And so in this case, they also have a shell with what we're going to have in class, but there are gastropods with no shell. You also will be able to explain how a radula is used when feeding. So some background information here. Gastropods are by far the largest and most varied group of mollusks. There's over 35,000 species. It includes snails, sea hares, sea slugs, terrestrial slugs, abalone. And, as far as knowledge that we have about gastropods coming into this lab, I think most of you may have heard of escargot before, which is basically snail, and a lot of times they'll serve that at fancy restaurants. Or you may have heard of, slugs in a garden being a pest. So maybe you haven't had that much experience with gastropods, but our lab's going to be the day to really expose ourselves to the wonder of this group of animals. Again, the purpose of this is to really look at the mollusk body plan and compare and contrast it, as well as looking at their feeding device and how they use it. What you're going to need for the lab when we do it You're going to need these notes that you're taking right now. You'll use these for reference. You'll also need your composition book to help with answering questions. We'll also have a ruler, finger bowl, water, a snail, a dissecting scope, hand lens, gravel, and also this really cool stuff called snail jello. So part 1 of our lab, we are actually going to warm the snails up. What we realized last year was that we would test the snails in all these different scenarios, and then we had them race. And we found by the time that we had them in the race, they were completely traumatized and they wouldn't move. So we're going to go ahead and get them in the race right away to add some excitement to start this lab. The second thing we're going to do is observe the radula. So you're going to take your snail from the Olympic race lane, put it in a glass bowl, and then you're going to get a snail jello snack. I got the recipe online. It's basically spinach and gelatin. So it's like little jello pieces of spinach. And it's been blended. So it's like a perfect snack for the snails. What you're going to do is you're going to place the snail in the bowl, and you're going to do a start time of whatever, and then 2 minutes later will be the end time. In this image here, you're going to draw where is the snail and where is the jello, and then you're going to make some observations. When you make observations, I want you to look at snail movement and radula use and answer the questions here. So one of them is, the movement with the mucus, and then what is the structure that they use for feeding? How would they use the structure for feeding? And what you want to do is use this image here to help you with that explanation. Like I said before, this radula has this odontophore and this conveyor belt of teeth. And so they'll move it back and forth, and then that will go, those little blue pieces are the food, and those go into its body through its complete digestive system. And then the last part, you're going to be looking at snail movement and how fast they move on different substrate types. Okay, so that'll be the third part, and then you'll answer some analysis questions. At the conclusion of the lesson, I want you to reflect on the lesson and write down things that you know, write down things that you're unsure of, and then actually things that you may want to learn more about. Because hopefully this lab will kind of inspire you to think a little bit outside the box about other types of gastropods and their body structure and function. So what I just talked about with this lab, I hope that you guys jotted down a few notes about part 1, part 2, and part 3 in your pre-lab notes, that you really have an idea of what's going on. Okay, so all you have to do if you didn't write that down is just replay this. Okay? All right, see you in lab tomorrow.